Last time we talked about general organization as far as function, physiology of the nervous system. Today I'd like to talk about how it's organized anatomically. There's 4 tissue types in the body: epithelial, connective, muscular, and nervous. Each one has its own specialized cells that perform a specialized function. The nervous system is primarily made of a specialized cell called a neuron, and its specialized function is to conduct an electrical impulse, nervous impulse. This is what it looks like right here, kind of a very different looking cell. It can be very, very long, but the important thing to understand is that many neurons make up a single nerve. So we're just going to look at a single cell right now. And I want to go ahead and tick off the parts of the cell, so we'll draw this and annotate it as we go along here. So let me just start off here. We start off with a whole bunch of sort of tentacles or hair-like structures here. These are called dendrites. There's our dendrites here. There's a whole bunch of them, and this is the beginning of the cell, and their purpose really is to gather information for the cell. And the reason why they're going off in many directions is because they can be getting information from many places all at once. Okay, all of that information then goes into the main body of the cell, which is this structure here, and that's called the soma. And inside the soma is where we'd find all the organelles that we know from cells, mitochondria and endoplasmic reticulum, lysosomes, and so forth. And we can already see that there's one already in the center here, and this organelle, of course, we know is the nucleus. It's not written down there, but I'm going to go ahead and write it down there so we have a feeling of where we are. And the purpose of the nucleus and the soma is to gather all this information the dendrites are bringing in and to make a decision whether or not it's important enough to initiate an electrical impulse. If that happens, an electrical impulse then, let's see if I grab a new color, would go down this long kind of tail here. That long tail is called an axon, like a wire sending an electrical impulse. And this can go for quite a long distance within the body. Now the problem with the axon is that it goes fairly slow as far as conducting the electrical impulse, but the body has come up with a way to speed it up. It coats this electrical wire with these guys here, and these guys are called myelin sheaths. Now myelin is kind of a fatty substance, and it sort of wraps around here. And the basic idea is that it really serves as kind of an insulation to speed up the electrical impulse. So much like if you had a copper wire, you wouldn't really have a raw wire. It would be covered with sort of a plastic or rubber coating insulation that moves it along. Who produces this stuff? Well, all this myelin is actually produced by cells which are found nearby, and those guys are called Schwann cells. And what typically happens in our formative years when we're young is that the Schwann cells kick in to make this myelin. So what you tend to find in young children, they tend to have very jerky, uncoordinated movements, and the reason is their nervous systems are not mature enough. They haven't really produced this myelin. And it also tells us that it's very important for young children to have a diet that has a fairly high fat content, because they need that fat to mature the nervous system. And then we finally get down to the last part of the neuron here. See if we have another color down here. This part here at the end is called the terminal button. Sometimes it's called the terminal clef. I'll write that down here just so you know. Terminal clef. Oops, I think I misspelled that, didn't I? Terminal clef. And the ending here is kind of an empty space. There's sort of a gap that appears here. We'll talk about this another time. And that gap is called the synapse. I'll just write that down there so you have an idea of where we're going to be heading next time. Synapse actually means a meeting place, and could be a meeting of a lot of things. Could be meeting another nerve down there, could be meeting a gland, a muscle. And how it gets across there is going to be a bit of a trick involving a neurotransmitter. We'll talk about that another time too. Okay, let's just summarize this again before we move on. So the dendrites gather information from lots of places. They bring it into the soma. So this stuff gets brought into the soma. The soma is kind of a processing center, or some people call it an integration center. And it then decides if enough information has been received to generate an electrical impulse. If so, it goes down the axon. Purpose is to conduct it. And you'll notice that this is all, by the way, moving in one direction, unidirectional. We don't get things going backwards there. It moves very fast because it's surrounded by these myelin sheaths. And then eventually we get down to the terminal area. And then there's kind of a empty zone here called the synapse. So that's the generic form of what a neuron looks like. The reason I say generic is because there's lots of variations on a theme. We find all sorts of neurons within the nervous system, and I just want to show you 3 different types. So if we take a look at our next slide here, you'll see that there's 3 types: multipolar, unipolar, and bipolar. The one we looked at already is really the multipolar. Why is it called multipolar? It means that there are many connections running into the soma. So in this case, we have 5 sets of dendrites, and also we have an axon. So there's 6 connections going into this central soma, and that's why it's called multipolar. Okay? Most of the cells within the nervous system are going to be multipolar. How about this one? And this one is very interesting. You only have one connection going into the soma, even though we have dendrites and axons here. And that's called a unipolar. This is a very common type of neuron found within the spinal cord. Here's another variation of a theme. This guy actually has 2 connections running into the soma. That's why it's called bipolar. I think this is actually the rarest type of neuron in the nervous system. It's really only found one place that I know of, which is in the retina of the eye, and it is connected to the photoreceptors in the retina, that is, the rods and cones. Okay, I think that's a good place to stop for today, and next time we'll talk about how this specialized cell can conduct an electrical impulse, which is going to be called an action potential.